our cities in the future? Do you think, for example, it might be that we see a home office as important as a garage? What do you reckon?
Well, the fundamental thing that's happened here is this has shown us how we can change human behaviour radically across the globe in a single week. We've been going on about climate change for years, people, arguing that it's not possible to do this or that. And look what we've done. In the interests of, the health and well-being of our most vulnerable, we've literally shut down economies. We've stopped travelling. We're working from home. We can do anything. And I think that's a really positive message. So, there's every reason we could take this and go, right, I live in South Auckland. It used to take us an hour and a half to get into town. Last week, everyone was going, wow, this is great. We can get there in 45 minutes because, the cars are off the road. So we know that we can do that. We can modify our behaviour if we have to. And so, why not? Why not rewrite how we live our lives?
That's interesting. Simon, we've had to modify our behaviour in a flash. So if you take climate change as an example, right, we've all been told that we have to reduce emissions, reduce consumption. In 1 week, that had to happen. It is brutal, but it's a total game shift, right?
Oh, I think that's absolutely right. There are going to be people coming out of this who are going to really love getting back into the office, but there will also be people who will go, I don't need to live like that anymore. I don't need to go to the office, or I don't need to go every day. And I now know that's true, and I now know that my company can support me doing it because we've just been working at home and it worked just fine. So that will change things. Now, environmentally, there must be so many ways in which our environmental footprint, our carbon footprint has diminished. When a trip out of the house means a walk to the local park rather than you've got to get in the car and go and do something. I imagine there's an awful lot of people who've discovered, actually, this is pretty good to do, or get on a bike and do it. In all sorts of ways like that, we have the opportunity to go, let's identify that. Let's know that was a good thing that we did. It's not regarded as temporary. Let's build on it and we'll go forward.
There will be a little bit of, we haven't got much time, but there'll be a little bit of push towards, the biggest issue perhaps will be we have a push towards intensification that might require a rethink now perhaps, in terms of, we know Simon?
That's a tricky one, isn't it? The thing is, we don't live in intense communities now. We could make our cities a lot more compact without getting into the enormous intensification that you'll see in many cities around the world. No. So there's a long way for us to go before we endanger ourselves in that way.
Final thoughts, Linda?
Well, it's really quite intriguing, isn't it? Obviously, we're not going to have everybody moving out into the country, I don't suspect, because most people who like city life, and that's not going to change. Yeah. But, I know personally, I have changed how we live radically as well in the last week. We're wasting absolutely nothing. My kids have finally learning that, when mum says there's no more milk, there actually is no more milk. We don't just whip down to the dairy. So it makes me feel slightly ashamed at how much waste we had been producing. And
that's
so
right.
I know I won't go back.
Vegetables you need to.
I know. It's pretty hard for the chickens, though. They're getting nothing.
Yes. Bless the chickens. Linda, Helen and Simon Wilson, you've been wonderful. Thank you very much for being with me on the panel. I'm Wallace Chapman. Checkpoint is next with all the latest. I'm Wallace Chapman, back tomorrow from 3:45. Till then, bye.
Koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. Haere nei, 76 new cases of COVID-19 today, bringing the total to 589. Among the 6 big clusters, 47 cases from Auckland's Marist College and more than 20 cases linked to a St Patrick's Day party at a bar in the small Waikato town of Matamata. Supermarkets have been put on notice. Shoppers now have a place to complain about alleged price gouging. A website to report lockdown breaches crashes within hours of being launched, with more than 4,000 complaints. A rogue Christchurch greengrocer is not an essential service, but he's refusing to shut up shop because that would mean dumping 50 grand of fruit and veggies. And we have an employment lawyer to answer all your questions about your job, your rights, and everything else during the lockdown and beyond.
RNZ News at 5 o'clock. No mai, Heidi mai. Good afternoon, I'm Paul Brennan. The government has set up an email for people to report any cases of price gouging by essential businesses that are open during the lockdown. The Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, says officials have been in contact with the major supermarkets daily and found no evidence of price gouging. However, Ms Ardern says anyone with concerns or reports of price gouging can send it to the email pricewatch@mbie.govt.nz.
I've already seen some reports made online on social media. Now I ask those individuals if you can specifically send those reports, say a copy of your receipt, a simple photo of what you've seen directly through to MB. This will enable us to make sure we are properly investigating any reports of price gouging.
Jacinda Ardern says nobody wants to see businesses take unfair financial advantage during this extraordinary time. Thousands of complaints have been made about people breaking the nationwide lockdown rules. Everyone is meant to stay at home or not go out unless they're an essential worker. Supermarkets are still open to the public and people can go for walks near their homes. However, the Police Commissioner, Mike Bush, says the Police 10-5 reporting website has received more than 4,000 complaints of people breaking that rule.
About 1,000 of them relate to business and the rest relate to people. So, for example, some of those reports are quite general. There are people congregating at Mairangi Beach that shouldn't be. So we'll deploy into that as a tasker.
Mike Bush says people should stay at home in their bubble. The tourism industry is bracing for border closures to remain in place for months. International tourism usually brings in about $1.5 billion a month, but that's been completely cut. Many businesses are facing closures, staff cuts and massive losses during lockdown. Regional Tourism Organisation's NZ Executive Officer, Charlie Eves, says opening the borders early could ruin a lot of hard work and sacrifice.
Opening the borders with COVID in our major markets still gets the risk of actually bringing it back into the country again. It's really something that we'll be looking to open as soon as we can, obviously. But I think firstly what we have to do is ensure that protect the health and well-being of New Zealanders first, stamp it out in our own country, and then we can look further afield.
Charlie Ives says domestic tourism will be vital for the industry. The Mayor of the Matamata COVID-19 district says locals are anxious after a cluster of 23 COVID-19 cases was confirmed in the area. The Waikato District Health Board says most of the cases have been identified as attending a St Patrick's Day party at the Redoubt Bar on March 17th or are directly linked to those who did. The DHB says work to date identifies the original source to be linked to overseas travel. The Mayor, Ash Tanner, says the news was unexpected.
This thing is new to all of us. Nobody could see this coming, or the ramifications or implications that it has for our communities, especially, businesses, schools, families, everybody really we're all in the same boat.
Anyone who was at the bar on March the 17th and now has COVID-19 symptoms should contact Healthline or their GP. The rural community is banding together to help a Marlborough woman whose husband died suddenly on the first day of New Zealand's lockdown. Farmer Gavin Dowling died unexpectedly on Thursday, leaving his wife Rosie and 3 young children grieving in lockdown. The youngest child, 9-month-old Olive, has a rare heart condition and is stuck in Wairoa Hospital. While mates help to run the farm, family friend Craig Liggins is auctioning off his own jersey from the last round of Young Farmer of the Year.
Their security blanket's been ripped right out from underneath them with the loss of the father and also the breadwinner, and Rosie's got some pretty big challenges in front of her now. And money doesn't fix everything, but it will help her take time to stick along the status quo until she works out what her next steps are.
A friend of the Dowling family, Craig Liggins. The Māori King says the most important thing right now is to protect whakapapa. In a rare public address from his home, Kingi Tuheitia says he was encouraged by the actions from iwi across the country in response to COVID-19. He acknowledged there were difficulties with tangihanga and Māori gatherings, but says they have to do what is right for hapu and iwi. He says what is most important is survival in order to protect whakapapa. The last New Zealand Defence Force personnel in Iraq are heading home. The Foreign Affairs Minister Winston Peters says New Zealand has fulfilled its commitment to the Iraqi government and the Defeat ISIS coalition to train Iraqi security forces at Taji. 28 arrived back in New Zealand last week and are in isolation at the Royal New Zealand Air Force Base in Auckland. The other 17 will be returning later this week. 2 weeks of school holidays started today for all but a few schools. The Education Ministry brought the start of the holidays forward from April the 10th to give teachers time to prepare for distance learning with their students during the lockdown. The Principals Federation says teachers need the break. Some schools asked for and received exemptions, allowing them to defer the start of the holidays. Radio Sport has stopped broadcasting due to the impact of the COVID-19 on sports events and advertising. The station's owner says it's been working hard to avoid the closure, but the reality of the impact of the virus is that the decision had to be made. It's believed Radio Sport has about 25 full-time staff and some casuals. And that's the news.
I'm Catherine Ryan. Tomorrow on 9 to noon, how doctors and patients are coping with the mass transition to virtual consulting. Childcare for essential workers, who's doing it and who's paying. Why the latest model EVs will warn pedestrians with sounds from nature. Atlanta Coley bringing science and comedy together with bees, poo and parasites. Keeping you company and up to date. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon on RNZ National.
Now the Met Service short forecast taking us through to midnight tomorrow Tuesday. Northland to North Taranaki, including Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and the Central High Country. Fine spells, a few showers, some heavy, possibly thundery this afternoon and evening. Gisborne, Waited Upper and Hawke's Bay, periods of rain with heavy falls, possible thunderstorms, gradually clearing from the north tomorrow. South Taranaki to Wellington, mainly fine, though a few showers developing this afternoon, clearing later tomorrow morning. Marlborough and Canterbury, periods of rain, clearing tomorrow morning. Isolated afternoon showers developing inland tomorrow afternoon, becoming cloudy from evening. Nelson, Buller, Westland, Fiordland, Otago and Southland, long fine spells, isolated showers about the ranges during the afternoon and evening periods. And at the Chathams, cloudy periods, isolated showers or drizzle. It's nearly 7 minutes past 5.
And this is Checkpoint. I'm Lisa Owen. The Prime Minister has this afternoon put supermarkets on notice, launching a website for New Zealanders to raise concerns about rising food prices. She says while there have been no evidence of price gouging, it would not be acceptable during the lockdown, where supermarkets are really the only place to buy essentials.
I'm aware, for instance, that there have been incidents of fresh produce price increases. We do need to be aware that these could simply reflect seasonal fluctuations. However, during a period in which there is less competition in the food retail sector and increased demand, it is more important than ever that prices are fair and reasonable. As such, we've created a reporting mechanism for the public. Pricewatch at mb.govt.nz. I want to repeat that again. Pricewatch at mb.govt.nz. A simple email address dedicated to reporting of potential price gouging. I've already seen some reports made online on social media. Now I ask those individuals if you can specifically send those reports, say a copy of your receipt, a simple photo of what you've seen directly through to MB. This will enable us to make sure we are properly investigating any reports of price gouging. No one wants to see anyone take unfair financial advantage from this extraordinary period. To be clear, it is not illegal for businesses to increase their prices, but the Fair Trading Act prohibits misleading and deceptive conduct and false representations.
The Prime Minister says any businesses flouting the rules would be breaching the Fair Trading Act. She added a decision on Easter trading and whether supermarkets could remain open on Good Friday would be announced tomorrow. Meanwhile, the Police Commissioner Mike Bush has made a subtle threat that if people can't get their social distancing right, the issue will get a rethink. Police were called to a 60-person party at a backpackers in Queenstown yesterday, and Mike Bush has concerns over the volumes of people trekking to Oriental Parade for exercise.
It did surprise me how many people were out and about. Yes, it's within the rules, but I observed a number of people that weren't keeping their social distance. Obviously, some were still in their bubble, but it was obvious to me that some weren't, and the social distancing was not being adhered to. I think that's something we really need to consider, and I'll take this opportunity to appeal to people. Again, you must stay local. That doesn't mean wandering off 5 or 6 miles. It's stay in your neighbourhood, stay close to home, and really keep that social distancing. I think if people aren't complying, we're going to have to revisit this. 3
people have been arrested for persistently breaching the lockdown rules.
Now, 2 of those people were taken into police custody, but later released without charge. 1 person remains in police custody, mainly because they had other outstanding matters in front of them. They'd come to our notice before. As per our 4-step plan, they'd been previously warned about their behaviour. They decided that they wouldn't oblige, so we obliged for them.
Mike Bush says police will be out in force checking that people are complying. He says 2 officers have also been confirmed with the virus, which has resulted in almost 400 others having to isolate.
They're quite different cases. The first case contacted via a police roll, so there were a number of people that they have been in contact with, so we're doing contact tracing and self-isolation in terms of that. I can't give you too much detail in terms of the second case, other than to say that we have several hundred police officers across the country self-isolating as a precaution and in response to that and other things.
He insisted the cases were not connected. 76 new cases have been announced today, bringing the total to 589. The Director General of Health, Ashley Bloomfield, says health authorities have sufficient information on 455 cases, which they've been able to break down.
57% of those have a direct link to overseas travel. 26% are close contacts of existing cases. 15% have both overseas travel and or close contacts, and just 2% are currently community transmission. That's around 10 cases that we know are definitely community transmission.
Ashley Bloomfield says they are currently investigating different clusters around the country to see if they are community transmission. The newest one is in Matamata, which the Waikato District Health Board has linked to a St Patrick's Day event at the Redoubt Bar. It is 12 minutes after 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Keen for your feedback. How did the weekend go? Did you witness any behaviour which doesn't fit the rules in your neighbourhood? What did you do about it? You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Rules preventing independent greengrocers from trading during the COVID-19 lockdown are said to be leading to huge food waste and high produce prices. The independents reckon they can drive the supermarket prices down if they're allowed to trade. Here's Ryan Drury from the Funky Pumpkin in Christchurch, who gave his $30,000 worth of produce to the City Missions.
We're not allowed to trade. We found out on the day at about 1 o'clock in the afternoon that trading was to be no more. So we had 4 hours or 5 hours to get rid of our product, and then whatever we had left was just our problem. So we ended up donating ours to the City Mission, but because we've been trading so well in the lead up because of all the panic buyers, myself and other fruit and veggie shops were all holding a lot of stock. So because of this, we ended up having to give away a lot of stock. It's been pretty hard to find an answer all the way through whether we were going to be open or closed. And as I say, it was only up until that Wednesday between 1 and 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Until then, we thought we were open, no problem. To be stuck with such a big loss, I mean, from my personal situation, I'm talking $20,000 or $30,000 worth of stock. I know of some other independents that have got stock on hand in 6 figures. That's it's a lot of money for a small shop. I appreciate the fact that we've got our wage subsidies. That doesn't pay us. And we've still got rents to pay as well, and it's tough.
That's Ryan Drury, and one rogue Christchurch greengrocer says he could be forced to dump more than $50,000 worth of produce. So he's decided to stay open and trade, despite the rules saying he should be closed. Dave says it just makes sense to stay open, and it's crazy to waste all that food.
They haven't told me not that I'm trading illegally. They have told other independents and closed them down. They haven't told me that, so I believe I'm not meant to be trading. But in saying that, I was told when I phoned them, I was told that it seemed that I would be okay to trade. But that was just probably from a, I don't know how much authority they had.
So it's all a bit confusing, really. How do you feel about that?
It is very confusing. The left doesn't know what the right's doing, I'm telling you now.
Yeah, so where does that leave you?
Just carry on trading and we'll just see what happens. You know what I mean? That's all that I can do. So it's just take one day at a time and just carry on. I'm the only one left in in Christchurch. Still trading.
You mean independent greengrocer?
Yeah, independent greengrocer. That's right.
What's happened to all the rest of them?
Closed down. Police have either told them or they've had a letter because they've applied and they've had a letter to say they're not to trade and to close down. So, so that's where it's at.
So the police turned up at your place and they were taking a few snapshots. What was the deal there?
Yeah. He was taking snapshots. He was going to send, I think it was either the MPI or MBI photos, and then they would just check their register to see if I was on the, if I was allowed to trade. So, but that was last Friday, and I haven't heard any more since.
So when the lockdown was announced, Dave, can you give us an idea of how much product you had in store, what it was worth, and what it would mean if you were just to have shut your doors?
Well, it wouldn't be very nice. I would say I'll just estimate between 50 and 60,000 sitting in the chiller. Now that would have to be thrown because you can't freeze it, you can't do anything. So it would be dumped. Simple as that. And we were told 2-3 o'clock in the afternoon. We close at 6, and the lockdown come into effect midnight. So not long at all.
So what would have that meant for you if you'd had to dump it?
Well, financially it would have been tough. It would have been tough. So, as if it isn't tough enough as it is, So, and if we had known this right from the start, well, obviously I wouldn't be buying stock, you know what I mean? So, I think that day there was 2 truckloads coming. So, I wouldn't have been buying stock. Most days have been 2 truckloads coming in.
So do you intend on continuing to buy stock and to stay open?
I've bought wee bits and pieces that I've stuck in the back of my ute because I'm just trying to get rid of existing stock. But I'm going to help out another independent who's been closed and he's got stock there. And I said, well, I'll help you out if I can move it. You know what I mean? So, yeah.
So Dave, would you like to stay open if you could?
Yeah, I definitely would. Yeah, I definitely would. For my customers, I would, yes.
So why do you think you should stay open when there are supermarkets out there serving the population?
The supermarkets like the business all to themselves, and I certainly don't like that. So I'm an independent. That's why I'm an independent. And I do think we can manage it better than what they can. We're managing the customers coming through the shop. A lot better than what has been happening at some of the supermarkets, especially over the weekend.
What difference do you reckon it will make to the prices if the independent greengrocers are allowed to be open?
Possibly we'll pull the price back down again because the greengrocers are fair, especially in Auckland. I think the greengrocers, it's only about 40% of the produce is sold through the supermarkets in Auckland. The rest is sold by independents and markets. So it's, it's a big chunk of the business, the independents, a big chunk.
So what happens to those suppliers then who don't have contracts with the supermarkets? What's happening to their stock right now?
Well, if they don't, it goes to independents, but if the independents aren't there, which they aren't, it'll just get dumped because there's no place for it. And you've got to remember the wholesalers, the restaurants are closed too. So, there's just the growers, it would just get dumped.
What do you think of that? Perfectly good food going to waste. What do you make of that?
Yeah. Oh, crazy. Absolutely crazy. There's no need for it. It's just silly, stupid, yes. It's all very well to rely on the supermarkets, but there's others that can do the job as good, better. You know what I mean? So better.
And that was Dave, an independent greengrocer still trading in Christchurch. And at her media stand-up a short time ago, the Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, confirmed fruit shops would need to stay closed for the remainder of the lockdown. Shoppers will be able to dob in alleged price gouging by supermarket chains after the government set up a special email address for people to send their complaints to. The two main brands, Progressive and Foodstuffs, have a duopoly in New Zealand, and the closure of greengrocers and butchers during the lockdown has raised concerns about further market domination and increased prices for shoppers who have little other choice. Countdown Supermarkets pushed pause on store specials when the lockdown started, but said today that they will bring back promotions and deals as demand starts to even out. Now, the new email address is pricewatch@mbie.gov.nz. And joining me now is Commerce and Consumer Affairs Minister Chris Farfoy. Good evening, Minister. I mean, what behaviours are you looking out for here? Because putting up the price in and of itself isn't breaking the rules, is it?
That's right. But I think obviously we've seen via social media and some media reports that people aren't necessarily happy with some of the prices either at their supermarkets, whether it be in person or online, and at other shops that are able to stay open like dairies at the moment. We're getting a constant stream, so the email address that you mentioned is the channel in which we'd like people to send those to in order for us to keep watch and vigilant of any prices that we believe may be unwarranted. As you say, it's up to each individual retailer in terms of the price points, but if they give a reason that is not necessarily the truth for that increase in price, the Fair Trading Act can kick in. And while it's difficult for us under Alert Level 4 to keep an eye on these issues, we certainly want to make sure that we're keeping an eye on that and being vigilant. And of course, we're in pretty regular contact with both the supermarket chains and as well as trying to make sure we can assist them to stay open for the population. We're having some pretty blunt conversations about our expectations around pricing.
So what kind of blunt comments and what are your expectations around pricing?
Well, they've got to play the game. They're the main source of food for almost all New Zealanders at the moment, and we've certainly seen some instances which they have said were genuine mistakes in terms of pricing. But as I've said, there's got to be some good faith here, but also if we see prices or a pattern of prices heading north that can't necessarily be explained because of supply chain issues or any seasonal issues, then we'll be having a chat to them, and and that's why the channel of information is important, so consumers can let us know what they're seeing.
Have you seen anything that gives you cause for concern or you think is, flying pretty close to what is acceptable here?
Yeah, we have raised particular issues.
What ones?
I think there's the infamous Portiki chickens, which we were told was a genuine mistake, and then there's been some fresh produce which has climbed and climbed in price. Some of that has been said as seasonal and drought conditions in some places. Look, to be clear, the supermarkets deny their price gouging, but we need to be very vigilant about these things now, which is why we need consumers to be our eyes and ears at this moment and to make sure that they send things in.
The thing is, those little operators like greengrocers and butchers, they keep the big players honest, they say. So why close all the competition down at this time? Because
our main frame in which we're making our decisions at the moment, Lisa, is to fight the virus and making sure that people stay in their homes and we minimise contact for people outside their bubbles is imperative. I did hear Dave on the line before I came on here. He shouldn't be trading because every person that he might serve is another potential COVID contact that could make things worse. And we have obviously said that supermarkets and dairies can continue to operate under strict restrictions. So it's one in, one out for dairies, and there are obviously restrictions and health guidelines for the supermarkets. But we need to make sure that people are safe, and we're maintaining that safety in all their interactions outside of their homes and outside, and so making sure that they are safe in their bubbles.
People will understand that, but there is concern about inconsistency around what is essential. So, for example, you mentioned yourself there, the dairies. Why the dairies and not the butcher and the grocery? And do you think that there is room for some movement on that or changes?
Look, the dairies were put in place because in some instances individuals or people might be travelling further to go and get a simple loaf of bread and a bottle of milk than their closest dairy. So again, it's about minimisation of movement.
So what's the difference between a dairy and a fruit shop then in this circumstance?
Well, as I say, because I think in most cases, most communities and metropolitan areas do have a dairy. Now, I don't think there are probably as many greengrocers. And again, Lisa, this is about minimisation of movement. Nothing is going to be perfect in the situation because we've shut down the country, and we need to make sure that we are keeping people safe. There are strict restrictions about those dairies, one in, one out. And again, there is control around customers at supermarkets. I know there are businesses arguing inequities, but we have to put people's safety first.
Will there be any compensation for those businesses that have had massive stock losses? So we've spoken to two people here. One had 30,000 of stock, one's got 50 grand worth of stock, which is going to be wasted. They can't sell it under these rules.
Look, Lisa, the honest answer to that is we haven't had any conversations about that. You could argue that across every business at the moment, and we're trying our best through wage subsidies and other support for businesses to make sure we can look after most New Zealanders. But there has been no conversation about compensation, and I'm not committing to anything in terms of that here.
So do you think, though, you'll bring it up with Cabinet?
Oh, look, I think we are trying to keep as many businesses viable as we possibly can, and that's obviously through the likes of wage subsidies, etc. And I think as we continue to answer a question that you had earlier, we will look at businesses that could continue that might be able to be expanded to sell essential goods, and we've done that today in terms of retail goods. But the first and underlying principle here is we need to keep people safe.
I note today that the Countdown chain says it's going to bring back specials. Is that a result of you guys having a conversation?
I don't think so. Look, as I say, we've had some pretty blunt conversations about we're keeping an eye on things, and they've got to do things right by A, their workers, and B, the consumers. And
so you've essentially put them on notice, Minister, it would be fair to say?
Pardon?
You've essentially put them on notice, have you?
We're talking to them regularly.
How regularly would you be chatting with them?
Look, either me or my office will be speaking to them on a daily basis, multiple times. We've got the challenge of supporting them to stay open, making sure that they can keep their stocks shelved, but also making sure that consumers get a good deal when, we've got the only channels of essential products like foodstuffs being dairies and supermarkets. But again, we're having some pretty blunt conversations about what those expectations are. And to be fair, Lisa, at this stage, I think they have been good conversations, but it's been a challenging 5 days.
Really appreciate your time this evening. That is Consumer Affairs Minister Chris Farfoy. The tourism industry is in survival mode as it braces for extended border closures. The government's not ruling out keeping up border restrictions until a vaccine for COVID-19 is available, which scientists say could be 12 to 18 months away. Tourism providers say they'll be eyeing up the domestic customers when the local lockdown eventually lifts, with some signalling it could be years before New Zealanders can travel internationally again. Tourism reporter Tess Brunton has more.
Milford Sound cruise operator Southern Discoveries closed its operations last week when restrictions were stepped up. Its chief executive, Tim Hunter, says 85% of its guests are from overseas.
We might go into 2021 with inbound tourism demand that might only be 30 or 40% of what it was a year ago. And if that's the case, we would have just considerably shrunk the organisation to be able to survive. So we've got some really serious challenges here.
Tim Hunter says he expects the borders will remain closed for a while.
That is of absolutely no surprise to us. Given the explosion of the virus around the world, we don't think it would be possible to open borders at that time. It would simply undo all the good work that's been done to keep the New Zealand population safe.
He's hopeful Australian visitors may return by October, followed by some Asian markets, but only if those countries can contain COVID-19. Tourism Industry Aotearoa Chief Executive Chris Roberts says businesses are going into hibernation to try and weather the border closure and lockdown.
Businesses need to cut their costs right back, look after their staff as best they can, but go into hibernation and hopefully be able to emerge again when the opportunity arises. If they're not able to come back, then we'll just have a devastated industry and be in no place to rebuild tourism in New Zealand.
International tourism brings in $1.5 billion a month, but Mr. Roberts says domestic tourism could be a saving grace, as it's usually $2 billion a month. Typically, domestic tourism makes up about 60% of the visitor economy.
There won't be a return to travel as it was in the past, and the new normal will take some time to bed in. So we're looking at a 5-year recovery for international travel. New Zealand will have to have much more focus on domestic travel, and that's where we'll turn to first.
Michael Baker is a medical epidemiologist at Otago University's Department of Public Health in Wellington. He says it could be 1 to 2 years before New Zealanders can travel internationally again.
Really, until that pandemic ends internationally, overseas countries will be a source of cases. And the only other thing that would change that is if we get a vaccine or very good antivirals. But unfortunately, it will take a long time before this disease disappears at the international level.
About 65% of spending in Queenstown in the year to January was from international travellers. District Mayor Jim Bolt says many are struggling.
Where we're concerned, it's gone from a lot to nothing. I mean, there's no middle ground for us. The town has simply shut. Businesses have shut. Gondolas not operating. The Earnslaw's tied up at the wharf. We are, to coin a phrase, dead in the water until the lockdown ceases.
Mr. Bolt says Queenstown Lakes will roll out the welcome mat when domestic travel returns.
Perhaps a visit here in the middle of the year, maybe if ski season operates, will be pretty attractive. And likewise, people from the South Island might think that Northland or the Coromandel looks pretty attractive in the wintertime. We will make our way, but it will be tough.
New Zealand Hotel Owners Association Executive Director Amy Robins isn't confident the domestic market will bounce back quickly.
People are wanting to stay isolated, and I don't think there's an appetite for domestic travel, and it's certainly not something that we're going to be relying on, in the coming sort of 3 to 6 months.
Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern this afternoon confirmed the government is not ruling out keeping up border restrictions until there is a vaccine for COVID-19, which scientists say could be 12 to 18 months away. For Checkpoint, Ko Tess Brunton, TNA.
On Checkpoint on RNZ National, the Ministry of Health announces new guidelines for funerals during Alert Level 4. Australia's death toll from COVID-19 climbs to 18 as the state of Victoria threatens fines of $1,600 for public gatherings of more than 2. Miscommunication over transiting Australia sees 24 New Zealand tourists stranded in Peru for the foreseeable future. Now, after 6 tonight, we're going to have an employment lawyer on to answer all your questions about your job and your rights during the lockdown and beyond. So get your questions coming in. You can text us on 2101, you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, Facebook us at Checkpoint, or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz, and she will hopefully be able to answer those for you. Let's get to the headlines now, though, with Paul.
Thanks, Lisa. As you've just heard, the tourism industry is bracing for border closures to remain in place for months. International tourism usually brings in about $1.5 billion a month, but that's been completely cut. The Prime Minister is not ruling out keeping up border restrictions until there is a vaccine for COVID-19. The Police Commissioner says the Police 10.5 reporting website has received more than 4,000 complaints of people breaking the nationwide lockdown rules. Mike Bush says people should stay at home in their bubble. The total number of COVID-19 cases has risen to 589, with 76 new cases confirmed today. The government has decided to allow the sale of some essential goods such as heaters, whiteware and computers. Stores selling essential goods must do so using online orders or phone orders and keep premises shut. Jacinda Ardern says the government never considered a herd immunity approach to COVID-19 because it came at too great a cost. She says herd immunity without a vaccine would require 95% of the population to have been infected by the virus, resulting in thousands of deaths. The government has set up an email for people to report cases of price gouging by essential businesses that are open during the lockdown. Officials say they've found no evidence of food shops hiking prices, but anyone with concerns or reports can email evidence to pricewatch@mb.govt.nz. First Union is welcoming a wage increase for staff at two of the country's largest supermarket businesses, but say they all deserve a living wage. Both Foodstuffs and Progressive Enterprises will give their essential workers a 10% pay increase during the 4-week lockdown. And the Prime Minister says plans to bring troops home from Iraq were not accelerated due to COVID-19. The government has announced personnel returning from Taji after completing the mission to train Iraqi security forces. Those are the headlines.
Thanks, Paul. If you are just joining us, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. Let's get to the business news now with Nona Peltier. Nona, I hear Tower Insurance is going to sue EQC. What's all that about?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. $80 million is what they're looking for. That's for monies that they think that they're owed for, I guess, expediting the repairs that were taking some time. So they thought that they were going to get reimbursed for those costs, but it hasn't happened. So they've kind of been waiting, I suppose, for some kind of settlement. Hasn't come, so they've gone to the court for it.
Okay, so in other news, a takeover offer for Abano Healthcare is off the table. What's going on there?
Yeah, so this was a joint venture company that was set up to take over Abano for about $150 million. And it was approved by shareholders at a special meeting, I think maybe the week before last. Come to think of it, it was very recently approved. However, at the same time, the folks in Australia, they have two dental chains. One is Lumino, the dentists. You may have heard of them in New Zealand.
Yeah.
The other one is one called Maven in Australia. So last week they had to shut down some of their facilities in Australia, and of course. Last week they had to do New Zealand, and today they had to do Australia. So that's a material hit to their income. So the bidder, a company called Bidco, said no thanks. So Abano's still talking to them and others that were potentially interested in the company. It was a very profitable and well-run company prior to all of this happening. So I guess we'll see what happens with that. Certainly there's still interest. However, their share price dropped 22% today as a result of that.
Yeah, and that is a direct relation to COVID-19, obviously.
Yeah, absolutely. So they're still looking at how they can keep some dental services open for emergency services. I don't think they've quite worked that out yet, though, because I guess obviously it's quite difficult to protect their frontline staff. So they're working on it. And again, we expect to hear more from them in the coming days.
So what else has been going on the markets today then?
Well, interesting. We had a kind of a poor start to the day, sort of following on from what we saw in Wall Street. There was, a couple $1 trillion stimulus. You think that would have been enough for the markets to take heart, but Wall Street weren't that impressed by it. In fact, the markets there fell. The Dow Jones Industrial Average was down 4%, and the other indices were about the same. Asia is also not very impressed, and that's because we've had some news out there that some assessments of the economic recession that we're expecting for the first half could be something in the order of 10%. And so those kinds of forecasts has really unnerved the market again. Now, so for whatever reason, though, Australia's been doing quite well, and New Zealand followed that market up in the afternoon. So we finished up 1.1% by 104 points to 9,661. The Australian market was up about 3%. I don't know exactly why it is that we're doing much better than the rest of the world, but there you go. And our Kiwi was steady. It was at 60.3 US cents, 98.2 Australian, and 48.7 British pence.
Thanks, Nona. That's Nona Peltier with Our Business Today. Family members within the same bubble of a deceased person will now be able to visit them in a funeral home after the Ministry of Health announced new guidelines for funerals and tangihanga this afternoon. Until now, only one member of the family could visit the funeral home to facilitate arrangements, and the deceased needed to be buried, cremated or refrigerated immediately. But the Ministry of Health Deputy Director General Māori Health, John Whanga, says after receiving feedback from funeral directors, they are easing the restrictions slightly for those within the immediate bubble of the deceased. John Whanga spoke to Mani Domlaup about what changes they are now applying to tangihanga and funerals.
The guidelines last week, they basically provided three options for whānau: immediate burial, immediate cremation, or if it was available, refrigeration. There was no opportunity for whānau to have a grieving process of any description. Basically, once the tūpāpaku or the deceased had been collected by the funeral parlour or the funeral directors, there wouldn't have been any more whānau engagement. Now, since we put out the guidelines last week, we've had quite a few responses from Māori funeral directors, iwi, and Māori organisations. And what we've worked over the weekend, because we said last week that we had to obviously hold a very strong line. This is level 4. It's really important for the whole country that we commit to the general principles of noa kāinga, so you should be staying around home. Kaue haere re tonu. So don't just go driving all over the place. However, having done some work with representatives of Māori funeral directors over the weekend, with iwi and Māori groups, we've looked at providing a whānau bubble option in terms of a grieving pathway. So it's not ideal and perfect, but it does mean that within the whānau, within the bubble of the tūpāpaku, they will be able, through negotiation with the funeral directors, to be part of a funeral service at the funeral directors and a local cemetery or urupa. So the key thing around there is not taking people outside of regions. But we've worked that up with funeral directors and have found a way that they will make key decisions about how many family members within the bubble might be able to participate safely. So there are things like physical distancing in the funeral home, and that's the only place we're looking at, because the funeral home is a controlled environment which is recognised under level 3 and 4. And obviously by that stage the tūpāpaku will be embalmed, and it will have protective casing around it. Funeral directors have also looked, for instance, at having clear latex so that you would be able to see the tūpāpaku, but there wouldn't be any chance of any risk of infection.
So just to clarify, so currently there's been no services allowed at the funeral homes?
No services allowed, yes.
So these changes mean that can happen, but only for the whānau bubble of which the person who has passed was in, yes. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. So there's two fundamentals it has to operate within, which have been set down by the Prime Minister as part of the overriding considerations for level 4. We must remain in the whānau bubble, or in our domesticated bubble, and also we can't have particularly interregional travel. So this is something that will at least provide a pathway within the immediate whānau who are in that bubble to have a grieving process. Now, can I say also, Māni, that none of this allows us to give the full expression of our tikanga, and we know that. It is nonetheless an opportunity for us, I think, to bring a bit more humanity into our advice from last week, but we are putting it out with this proviso that if things change, particularly if we have community-level outbreaks, then we will have no choice but to reconsider this. I think the other important thing about these guidelines is while there was a particular push from Māori to have their cultural needs respected, it also provides an avenue for other New Zealanders within their immediate bubbles to be able to also have at least a grieving process and at least have some opportunity to do what needs to be done, even if it's a very short opportunity, to say things and to do things that are important before someone is buried or cremated.
That's the Ministry of Health's Deputy Director General Māori Health, John Whana, speaking with Mani Domnop there. And more than 20 cases of COVID-19 have been linked to a St Patrick's Day party at a bar in the small Waikato town of Matamata. The Waikato District Health Board has confirmed there are now 23 cases in the area, 3 of those people working in bars and restaurants in Matamata. Most have been identified as attending the celebration at the Redoubt Bar on March the 17th, or they're directly linked to those who attended. It's believed the original source had recently travelled overseas, but the cluster's being investigated for community transmission. Katie Scotcher has the details.
On March the 17th, people packed into the Redoubt Bar and Eatery in Matamata to celebrate St Patrick's Day, unaware someone present was carrying COVID-19. 11 days later, on March the 28th, the owners of the Redoubt Bar made this post on social media.
What an insidious, awful virus this is. We have had a confirmed case of COVID-19 amongst our staff. We have been in daily contact with the District Health Board and have been reassured that everyone is doing what they should be now. self-isolating and watching for symptoms.
There are now 23 cases of COVID-19 in the Waikato town. RNZ contacted the owners of the Redoubt Bar, but they declined to comment. The Horse and Jockey Inn and the O'Dalim's Cafe in Matamata have also confirmed a staff member at each establishment has tested positive for the disease. The Mayor of Matamata, Ash Tanner, says people in the area are feeling anxious.
This thing's new to all of us. Nobody could see this coming, or the ramifications or implications that it has for our communities, especially, businesses, schools, families, everybody really is. We're all in the same boat.
Any Matamata residents or visitors who were at the bar on March the 17th with symptoms of COVID-19 are being urged to contact Healthline or their GP. Ash Tanner says many people from Matamata were travelling to Te Aroha, which is a 30-minute drive away, to be tested for COVID-19. He says another testing station has now been set up closer to home.
The Ministry of Health and Waikato District Health Board have authorised the set-up of another centre in Matamata, which is going to be at the Civic and Memorial Centre, Matamata, and that's set up at 3 p.m. today, which is great news.
The Waikato District Health Board says all swabs taken from Matamata will undergo priority testing. The Director General of Health, Dr. Ashley Bloomfield, says the cluster is being investigated for community transmission.
We know that there was an index case that was associated with overseas travel. What's not clear is the extent to which there might be community transmission, so we're doing a full investigation of that cluster at the moment.
The Ministry of Health is investigating 5 other clusters of COVID-19 across the country. The Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, says the number of clusters highlights the importance of the strict lockdown period.
The virus, once present, has proven it can spread easily at a school, at a wedding, at a conference, or even at a local bar. These are all commonplace gatherings we normally take for granted, but have proven to be a place where this virus can spread successfully.
The other clusters are at Auckland's Marist College, the World Hereford Conference in Queenstown, a group who travel to the United States, a rest home in Hamilton, and a private wedding in Wellington. Mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi nei, ko Katie Scott Churaho.
A police website for reporting suspected lockdown breaches was so overrun with complaints, it crashed just hours after being launched. If you suspect a business or individual is breaching the COVID-19 Level 4 isolation rules, you can now head online to fill out a report. It's a new service launched just yesterday and received more than 4,000 submissions in its first 24 hours. Annika Smith reports.
As households around the country enjoyed their first solitary Sunday, the New Zealand Police launched an online reporting system for anyone worried about others breaking the isolation rules. It proved an immediate hit with the public. Police Commissioner Mike Bush says it's clear people aren't just passionate about following the rules, but enforcing them too.
The vast majority of Kiwis, of people inside New Zealand, are complying brilliantly. They know that to stay home saves lives. At the same time, those people who are complying are very passionate to ensure that others comply.
Mr Bush says the police received 4,200 reports since the reporting system was launched at 1 o'clock yesterday afternoon. So many the system crashed.
Again, it shows how determined Kiwis are to ensure that everyone complies with us. We crashed that system, we've put it back up again, it's working.
Mr Bush says 1,000 of the reports related to businesses suspected of breaching the essential services rule, while the rest of the reports related to individuals. The new website was set up to ease pressure on the 111 line. There were 2,000 calls in just 2 days last week relating to COVID breaches. The figures don't surprise clinical psychologist Ian Detert, a senior lecturer at the School of Psychology at Massey University. He says people following the rules will be annoyed, others are not.
People get frustrated by other people not doing what they've been told by the government. Some people can't tolerate differences when some people don't do what they've been told to do. I'm doing it, so why shouldn't other people do it?
Mr Duterte says people will also be mindful people's behaviour now will affect how long the lockdown lasts. The current level 4 restrictions are in place for 4 weeks, but will only be lifted when it's safe to do so.
Some people can realise if we don't do this, this lockdown period or level 4 period might go on longer than the 4 weeks.
The police have the power to arrest and detain people for breaking the rules and have so far arrested 3 people found breaching them even after official warnings. Some people, however, have taken matters into their own hands, with iwi in some parts of the country asking the public to stay off their land during the lockdown. Mike Bush says police aren't using checkpoints themselves, but are supporting others to do so lawfully.
We're working with a lot of local communities. A lot of people want to set up checkpoints and keep people out of their places, out of their areas, out of their towns. We want to work with them to make sure that's absolutely lawful.
Ian Duterte says seeing others bending the rules can add to an already heightened sense of stress and anxiety at this time. He has 2 pieces of advice for anyone struggling with rule breakers. The first, to focus on what you can control, and the second, to lead by example.
You can only control what you can control. If you're doing the right thing by staying away from people, that's good. And also modelling to people what you should be doing.
Authorities are very clear that if it's an emergency, you can still call 111. But if you're calling to complain about a gathering you've spotted or a park or beach overrun with people, your first port of call is the police's website or calling the non-emergency number 105. I tāmaki makoto, mō te hōtaka o te ahi nei, ko Annika Smith aho.
It's 10 minutes to 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Keen for your feedback on anything you've heard on the programme this evening. And don't forget, we've got an employment lawyer after 6 to answer your questions. You can text those in on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or send us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Desperate New Zealanders stuck in Peru are pleading with the government for help after they were bumped off an Australian charter flight that was meant to get them home. Over the weekend, 24 Kiwis who had paid more than $5,000 each for seats were told they couldn't board because there was no same-day flights from Sydney to Auckland once they landed. But as they later discovered, there is a flight and they could have transited through Australia after all. Our reporter Sarah Robson has the story.
Disgusted, devastated. Today we're walking back from the supermarket and we saw our flight leave and we're like, oh, there goes our flight. Like, we should have been on that. We should be going home right now.
Sarah Cook was one of the 24 New Zealanders who'd booked a seat on the charter flight out of Peru, organised by Australian travel company Chimu Adventures. Just 2 days before the flight was due to take off, they were told they wouldn't be able to board because once they landed in Sydney, there were no connecting flights to Auckland that same day. But that wasn't the case.
Today we woke up to an email sent at about midnight from Chad at Chimu, and he was apologising, saying that there was actually a flight with LATAM Airlines flying from Sydney to Auckland on Tuesday, and sorry, but it's too late to get you back on that flight from Peru to Sydney.
Caleb Nicol is also trapped in Peru. He's holed up in a hostel in Lima. He and his friend had booked seats on the Chimu Adventures flight too.
It was just gutting. It was just like, we've had dagger after dagger after dagger, and this was literally our one option. It was our golden ticket out.
Caleb Nicol got in touch with his travel agent back in New Zealand as soon as he heard he wouldn't be able to get on the Chimu flight. He says she found the LATAM Airlines flight from Sydney to Auckland and double-checked that it hadn't been cancelled.
And we made Chimu very aware of this, and they told us that they had confirmation from LATAM Air that flight was not going to operate. However, my travel agent back home had a confirmation email saying that flight was 100% leaving the ground, that Chimu wouldn't put us back on the plane.
Caleb Nicol says New Zealanders in Peru had been encouraged to sign up for the Chimu flight by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs.
We have it in an email. That was their advice to us, and we did. Now that that's fallen through, we need help. That's it. We have no way to get home now.
Another New Zealand traveller caught up in the chaos is Jack Jones. He says Chimu Adventures has done everything it can to get them home.
The issue here has been a breakdown of communication between everyone. And I think you have to feel for a position of a private Australian tourist company trying to organise with 3 different governments to get us home.
Sarah Cook says while no one party is entirely to blame, it is time for the New Zealand government to step in and help.
Temu have actually been doing something at least in trying to get us on this flight. Unfortunately, who they were working with, the Australian government, the New Zealand government, Air New Zealand and LATAM, everyone just kind of failed us there because none of them were talking with each other.
The Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern has previously said government-arranged repatriation flights would be extremely difficult to organise. Last week, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs advised New Zealanders overseas to think about staying where they are because the window to get home via commercial flights had effectively closed. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi, ko Sarah Robson, aho.
COVID-19 has now claimed the lives of 18 in Australia as the government there announced a crackdown on public gatherings of more than 2 people from 11:59 tonight. In the state of Victoria, where the alert level has been raised to 3, police will issue on-the-spot fines of $1,600 for breaching the ban. As of this afternoon, there have been 722,000 odd officially reported cases of the virus worldwide. 33,976 people have now died from the COVID-19 coronavirus, and the World Health Authority says 151,766 people have recovered from COVID-19 infections. In the UK, there have been 1,228 deaths, over 1,000 in England, 48 in Wales, 41 in Scotland, and 21 deaths in Northern Ireland. The BBC's science editor, David Shookman, has more.
In this critically important time, the Prime Minister Boris Johnson, himself infected, has been chairing meetings while in self-isolation. And he's written a letter to be sent to 30 million homes across the UK with a stark message. It's important for me to level with you, he says. We know things will get worse before they get better. But we are making the right preparations, and the more we all follow the rules, the fewer lives will be lost and the sooner life can return to normal. But that won't come soon. The daily briefing at Number 10 made that very clear.
Over time, probably over the next 6 months, we will have a 3-week review. We will see where we're going. We need to keep that lid on, and then gradually we will be able to hopefully adjust some of the social distancing measures and gradually get us all back to normal.
That idea of a long haul was echoed by Scotland's First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon.
13 weeks is likely to be the kind of period that we have to be prepared to have measures in place. Of course, we will continue to keep under review the type of measures, and we will not keep measures in place for any longer than we have to do.
All this on a painful day made worse by the loss of an ENT surgeon. And tonight, some more optimistic news about the NHS. 20,000 retired doctors and nurses have now offered to return to work, prompting this response from the Prime Minister.
One thing I think coronavirus crisis has already proved is that there really is such a thing as society.
Once again, a reminder of the incredible importance of everyone making an effort to stop the spread of the virus.
In the United States, President Trump has backed away from a threat to quarantine the entire state of New York and 2 adjoining states. Instead, residents are being strongly advised against all non-essential travel. Freya Cole reports.
Effective immediately, the Centres for Disease Control and Prevention urged residents in the 3 states to stop all non-essential domestic travel for 14 days. It says the advice does not apply to employees of critical infrastructure industries, including trucking, public health, financial services and food supply. The idea of an enforced quarantine had outraged some city leaders who feared it would paralyse the economy and cause mass confusion.
I didn't speak to him about any quarantine. I haven't had those conversations. I don't even know what that means.
The United States now has the highest number of cases in the world. Some medical workers say they no longer feel safe, pleading with residents to do the right thing and stay at home.
Earlier today, President Trump tweeted that the US will not pay for the security of the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. Now they've relocated to Los Angeles. Prince Harry and his wife moved quickly to quash concerns by issuing a statement saying they had always intended to pay for their own security arrangements. Let's get quickly to some of your feedback now before the 6 o'clock news on the subject of greengrocers. They're not considered essential services and have to close. But this person says if the greengrocers were open, maybe there would be less lines still at the supermarket. On the other hand, Tim says no sympathy for the Christchurch greengrocer who claims he had too much stock. Everyone had plenty of notice. Our local pub, the Cadrona Hotel, offloaded all their perishable food to locals at cost price and closed when required. Tim says the Christchurch greengrocer, this is a greengrocer that is still operating despite not being an essential service, should have done the same. After 6, we've got an employment lawyer on the program to help you with your questions about what happens around COVID-19, your job and the ongoing situation. Quickly text your questions in 2101.
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Good evening, I'm Paul Brennan. The Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, says action will be taken if businesses are found to be price gouging. A new email, pricewatch@mb.govt.nz, has been set up for people to report any cases of price gouging. Jacinda Ardern says this will allow the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment to enforce the law. She says in some cases it may be the seasonal variation in produce causing the difference in price.
But in other cases, if companies or suppliers, if retailers are taking advantage of their essentially duopoly in the market and taking advantage of people who are acting in good faith, just going out to buy their everyday needs, then we will act on that. That is illegal.
Jacinda Ardern says officials have been in daily contact with the major supermarkets, but so far have not found evidence of price gouging. The government has decided to allow the sale of some essential goods such as heaters, whiteware and computers. The Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment says stores selling essential goods must do so using online orders or phone orders and keep premises shut. Essential goods now include household appliances, blankets, fridges, heaters and computers. The Prime Minister says the government never considered a herd immunity approach to COVID-19 because it came at too great a cost. Jacinda Ardern is warning that grappling with managing borders will be an issue globally until there is a vaccine. She says herd immunity without a vaccine would require 95% of the population to have been infected by the virus. Ms Ardern says people being exposed to that degree would mean thousands of deaths.
So that's not an option in New Zealand. It's not something we ever considered. That means that we have to continue to try and protect ourselves while we wait for a vaccine. So it does mean border restrictions will be part of our management system.
The total number of COVID-19 cases has risen to 589, with 76 new cases confirmed. 12 of those people are in 9 hospitals around the country, with 2 currently in intensive care. Queenstown's mayor says he is incensed about a party at a backpackers hostel last night, despite the country being in lockdown due to COVID-19. The police visited the Deco backpackers on Sunday night after reports 25 to 30 people were holding a party. Jim Bolt says the owners of the backpackers didn't know about the party and are distraught it took place.
Our community in particular is suffering socially and financially as a result of this. We're going through that sacrifice to try to beat this thing, and if all that effort is put in and it's wasted because some idiots decide they want to have a party, that's just unacceptable where I'm concerned.
Queenstown Mayor Jim Bolt. The Prime Minister says plans to bring troops home from Iraq were not accelerated due to COVID-19. The government has announced personnel are returning from Taji after completing the mission to train Iraqi security forces. 28 personnel have already returned to New Zealand and are in isolation at the Royal New Zealand Air Force Base in Auckland, while the remaining 17 will return later this week. Jacinda Ardern says the commitment was to withdraw by June at the latest, and the timing is purely down to logistics.
It had been my hope that we would be able to really acknowledge their return and welcome them, as many New Zealanders would want to do. But we've already started on their return.
Jacinda Ardern says she feels for the troops who, after so long away from family, must spend another 2 weeks in isolation. It's coming up to 4 minutes past 6. To sport now, National Rugby League executives have told clubs they will cut their own head office costs by 70% so the NRL can meet the funding commitments it's made to clubs and players during the coronavirus crisis. During a phone meeting today, the 16 clubs were told they will get additional funding from the NRL to ensure they're able to survive the pandemic. Players will face significant pay cuts, but the Rugby League Players Association has come to an agreement which allows players to access retirement and hardship funds. How New Zealand athletes have reacted to the postponement of the Tokyo Olympics and the removal of local training facilities due to COVID-19 has impressed former Olympic rower and current New Zealand team chef de mission Rob Waddell. The International Olympic Committee confirmed last week that the Games would now be held in 2021, a move which impacts on athletes' preparations. Waddell says as the news of the change of date sinks in for some of the country's top athletes, how they can keep training while New Zealand is in lockdown will vary from sport to sport.
I think probably some of the biggest challenges for our team will be the range of training abilities. Some athletes, they'll be able to train largely normally, given the circumstances, but most of them can't access, or none of them can access the facilities and the infrastructure that they normally would.
Rob Waddell. And New Zealand Rugby has today cancelled all provincial representative rugby tournaments below the top-tier men's Mitre 10 Cup and women's Farah Palmer Cup for this year. The cancellations include the Heartland Championship as well as the National Under-19 and National Sevens tournaments. That's the news.
Cabin fever starts to set in.
Can you imagine having to talk to the same person for the past 4 days? My papa's got terrible chat as it is. I can't imagine only having him to talk to.
So lower your expectations.
We can't expect people to aim for happiness. That's a stretch. We have to think small. We have to stay present.
And planning for life after the lockdown.
The economy's not like a light switch. It's more like an oven. It will take a while to warm up, and we are thinking of what we can do to support that happening as quickly as possible.
Lock in 101 FM for Morning Report, weekdays from 6 on air and online.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow Tuesday, Northland to North Taranaki, including Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and the Central High Country. Fine spells, a few showers, some heavy, possibly thundery this afternoon and evening. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa, periods of rain, heavy falls, possible thunderstorms, gradually clearing from the north tomorrow. South Taranaki through to Wellington, mainly fine, though a few showers developing about now, then clearing tomorrow morning. Marlborough and Canterbury, periods of rain, clearing in the morning. Isolated showers in the afternoon tomorrow, developing inland and becoming cloudy from tomorrow evening. Nelson, Buller, Westland, Fiordland, Otago and Southland, long fine spells, isolated showers about the ranges during the afternoon and evening periods. And at the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods, isolated showers or drizzle there. 6:30 news and weather again at 7.
If you're just joining us, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. After days of warnings and education, police are taking a harder line for those repeatedly breaking the isolation rules. The Police Commissioner's rhetoric around tourists flouting the rules is ramping up. New Zealanders are getting in on the enforcement too, and now the Prime Minister has supermarkets in her sight. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch.
Day 5 of the nationwide lockdown, into the harsh reality increasingly clear.
We have, over the last few days, had cause to arrest 3 people for persistent breaches.
The first to face consequences for flouting the rules, chucked in a police cell and left to cool their heels. 2 of the offenders were later let go, 1 remains in custody. Police Commissioner Mike Bush says they mean business.
We will be out there ensuring people do comply, because we can't say it enough, stay home saves lives.
But for some, that message is still not getting through. The police set up a website yesterday for people to dob in offenders. Overnight, it's racked up more than 4,000 reports. In Queenstown, a group of backpackers threw a hostel party last night. In Wellington, hundreds turned out on Oriental Parade to capture some late Sunday sun. And reports still of camper vans flitting up and down the country.
I think if people aren't complying, we're going to have to revisit this.
We will continue to enforce the measures that break the chain of transmission.
The Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern has repeated the rules ad nauseum over the past few days, and she's beginning to lose her patience with those choosing to ignore her.
We are at level 4, requiring people to stay home, because if we didn't do that, thousands of New Zealanders would die. It's as simple as that.
The consequences could not be clearer. The modelling shows had New Zealand done nothing, up to 80,000 people could die. Some countries, like the United Kingdom, initially explored a strategy of building herd immunity by effectively allowing the virus to spread.
Without a vaccination, it means people having been exposed. People being exposed to that degree means thousands of people dying. So that's not an option in New Zealand. It's not something we ever considered.
And so the public, she says, must follow the rules. And not just the public either. The Prime Minister today put supermarkets in her sights after outrage from consumers complaining about a perceived hike in prices. She says officials have investigated and found no evidence of price gouging yet, but they've set up an email address, pricewatch@mb.govt.nz, where people can report cases during the lockdown.
If retailers are taking advantage of their essentially duopoly in the market and taking advantage of people who are acting in good faith, just going out to buy their everyday needs, then we will act on that. That is illegal.
Neither supermarket chain was available for an interview this afternoon, but Countdown has previously said it dropped its specials due to the broken supply chain. Today it confirmed it will bring back its promotions over this week and the next. Reintroducing specials, it says, is a high priority. The other big supermarket company is Foodstuffs. In a statement, it says Pack and Save continues to have the country's lowest grocery prices. As for New World, it says about 4,800 products were on special last week, just down 200 from a regular week, and that's due to reduced availability.
We are committed to doing our level best to keep prices low, but the reality exists that if you buy a cauliflower in March, you are buying it out of season. On the back of a drought, it will not be cheap. Broccoli, on the other hand, is a great buy at the moment.
The opposition has been calling for the government to open butchers and greengrocers during the lockdown to classify them as essential services. David Seymour says that alone would act against price gouging.
Well, just a few short weeks ago, the government strategy for getting down the price of petrol was more competition. They've now handed a virtual monopoly to supermarket chains, and unsurprisingly, prices have risen.
But Ms Ardern's not budging.
For every greengrocer, for every bakery that is open, that's a workforce that's also put at risk, and we need to minimise that as much as possible.
Day 5 of the lockdown and at least 23 more to go. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Craig McCulloch.
A nationwide property management company is actively discouraging landlords from offering rent holidays to struggling tenants during the COVID-19 shutdown. On its website and in emails to landlords, Property Brokers says tenants should instead be encouraged to seek government help or offered grocery vouchers or assistance with utility bills. That's appalled a renters advocacy group who says it's far from the kind approach the government is encouraging people to take right now. Our reporter Robin Martin has more.
In its COVID-19 alert plan on its website, Property Brokers acknowledges that many landlords have approached it wanting to reduce rental payments or offer rental holidays. But in the plan, the company says it wants to maintain rental payment continuity and that government assistance is there for a reason, and most people who have lost jobs or are on reduced salaries would qualify for it. Advocacy group Renters United says it's been approached by landlords horrified at Property Brokers' stance. Organiser Anna Mooney says the company's approach flies in the face of the government's call to be kind.
So it's really, really nice to actually see landlords helping out their tenants with rent payments, and we really want to applaud all the landlords that are doing that. But frankly, it's pretty appalling to see that some property managers are making it impossible for landlords to actually show that compassion.
She says one landlord was called by a tenant whose household had lost its main income and was now reliant on work and income payments.
So they really wished to give their tenants 4 weeks free rent, but when they went in and approached the property managers, they discouraged them from doing that. They encouraged them to let them know about the government subsidies and then asked them to instead provide them with food vouchers and helping out with their power bill.
The landlord was willing to continue paying the 10% management fee. Ms Mooney says many businesses are taking a hit during the lockdown and Property Brokers should be facilitating rent holidays, not discouraging them. Adam Coburn is the president of the Capital Property Investors Association. Mr Coburn finds Property Brokers' approach a strange one.
if that landlady and any other investors indeed want to make offers to make it financially easier for tenants in a bit of trouble or finding it difficult in these times, then that's a kind thing to do. And I think it's unusual to discourage it.
Mr. Coburn says he knew of other landlords who'd been able to offer rent holidays.
I'm hearing some instances where property owners have reached out and offered rent reductions. Certainly I use Low & Co property management, and I have heard that some owners have offered rent reductions and those have been offered to the tenants.
Mr. Coburn says landlords need to remember the property manager works for them.
Exactly right. If the property owner wanted to proceed with such an offer, then I'm sure they could just simply give their instructions to the property management firm and tell them what to do.
Mr. Coburn, who is also an agent at Low & Co Realty, says he has contacted all of his own tenants but has yet not offered any rental holidays. In a statement, Property Brokers General Manager Property Development, Will Alexander, acknowledges these are trying and difficult times for everyone. Mr. Alexander says the company is contacting all its tenants and owners and asking them if they require support or would like to provide support. He says each situation is unique and its property managers are working with the tenants and landlords on a case-by-case basis. Mr. Alexander did not respond to questions about why Property Brokers was discouraging rent holidays in preference to grocery vouchers and help paying utilities bills. Mo te hōtaka o te ahiahi nei, ko Robin Martin-Aho.
It's 16 minutes after 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Well, with all but essential businesses closed for the lockdown, many people are either working from home or not working at all. But should you be paid in full or only the wage subsidy? Can you be told to take annual leave? And what about essential workers? Do they have to make the choice between getting paid or their health or the health of someone else in their bubble? We put a call out for your questions earlier and have received so many. Joining me now on the phone to answer as many as possible is employment law advocate Ashley Feckney. Ashley, thanks for joining us. We will try and get through as many of these as we can. Shall we start with wage subsidies? A lot of questions around this. The first one is regarding essential workers who have either been put off sick themselves or aren't working in order to protect someone at their home or have children that they have to look after. They've been told to use their annual leave. Are they entitled to the wage subsidy?
Okay, well, if we break that down, if someone is sick and they are potentially had the COVID-19, then they are eligible for what used to be the leave subsidy. I understand that's now been wrapped up with the wage subsidy. So if you're sick and you're concerned that it could be COVID-19, your employer should be paying you for 2 weeks, and that can be reviewed. If you are high risk, there is currently no subsidy available to you, and you'll need to use your annual leave or sick leave. But I understand from the government's announcement today that there is an intention to release funding options. Now, parents, this is something I have had a lot of questions about, essential workers that can't work. And unfortunately, this group of people are currently slipping between the cracks. There's no funding. There appears to be no intention to fund. And in that case, they can only use their annual leave and sick leave.
Okay, so can an employer still ask you to use annual leave even if they have applied for the wage subsidy?
So the government has made this very clear that the expectation is that if an employer is receiving the wage subsidy, they can't require an employee to use their annual leave instead of getting paid this wage subsidy.
Okay, so you should get the wage subsidy and you shouldn't be forced to use your annual leave. Another person, similar lines, but they say if the employer is refusing to give them the wage subsidy, and this worker says that they have offered to top it up to 80% out of their annual leave, where can they go? Because they say they're afraid if they report them, they'll be made redundant. What are their options?
At the moment, there aren't many options, but I do know that the government are looking to set that up. So I understand they want to set up, first of all, a public list of companies that receive the wage subsidy, and second of all, a reporting line. The employee should not be made redundant as a response to this, but if employers acted perfectly, I wouldn't have a job. And my hope is that this line would have some sort of anonymity to it.
Right, so we're waiting to see if there's basically a dob your employer line to come on. This one is interesting. They say the employer is still taking PAYE, KiwiSaver, student loans and other deductions from the wage subsidy before I get paid. Is that okay?
Yes, so the purpose of the wage subsidy is to help the employer pay its obligations to the employee, and so that means it will be subjected to tax.
Okay, so still all the same deductions apply. This is an interesting one which has just come in, Ashley. So this is someone who was supposed to start work in the last 10 days, right? So the company, once the lockdown started, put off the start date for this person. Now they have been sent a letter saying not even a deferred start date, that's it, no job for you, I'm afraid, because of the conditions. They've offered an ex gratia payment to this person who has moved cities to take up this new job, but say there's now no job for them, even though the contract was all signed and sealed before this happened. So what is this person's options?
So the Employment Relations Act states that an employee also includes a person that's intending to work. So this person would fall inside that category and could possibly look to raise a personal grievance for an unjustified dismissal, so long as that redundancy was not carried out fairly or reasonably. But if this employer, in my view, should have applied for the wage subsidy for this employee, and they should have at least had that.
Right. So is the ex gratia payment, is that sort of almost categorised as a redundancy payment, is it, in some way?
It could be. I would need to see a bit more about what that payment looks like, or it could be a settlement.
But basically, the person who, the company that was offering the job should really be, in the first instance, looking to get the wage subsidy and taking this person on because the deal was already signed and sealed.
Absolutely, and I think that if anyone's looking to make a redundancy, that is one situation they should be considering, that the employee could have at least been paid the wage subsidy. That's the purpose of it.
Okay. This one's actually from an employer. They say we're a low profit margin essential service whose income loss would be about 25%, so outside of the scope of the wage subsidy package. So for people listening, you have to be able to prove a 30% reduction in your income. They go on to say, what are we supposed to do with our employees that have to stay home because they've got dependents to look after? Several of our employees are in this position and we can't afford to keep them on sick leave. They have a labour-based job, so they can't work from home. Do we fire them? We don't want to, but it seems like there is no other option, this employer is saying.
So first off, the employer is only required to pay them their sick leave, and once that exhausts, there's nothing else they need to pay. The second option is they should maybe consider getting casuals on for that period. It's too risky to look to dismiss this employee during the time, and they also have to consider that they may be at risk of discriminating against these employees. I would highly recommend against it, but if it was an absolute last resort, definitely seek legal advice because you'd be opening yourself up to significant risk.
Okay, so they have to pay the sick leave, talk to their workers about casual contracts perhaps, and take some legal advice if they feel they can't afford those options.
Certainly.
All right. Now, paid parental leave. This is coming up a little bit too. This person says, my paid parental leave is due to end this week. I had a meeting prior to the lockdown about starting back at work at the beginning of April, part-time, and asked if I would still get paid by work if we were to close. So do I still get paid from the 6th of April, this person is asking?
Absolutely. There was an agreement for her to return to work on part-time and she should be paid for those hours. But I do recommend talking to her employer about it. They should have applied for the wage subsidy to be able to cover those hours that she can't work.
Okay. And this is someone expecting in November to get paid parental leave. You have to work average 10 hours a week in 26 weeks before the birth. Not possible if the lockdown is extended, says this person. This is a really good point, actually. Will paid parental leave eligibility be adjusted for those not able to work enough to meet the criteria this year because of the lockdown?
Yeah, absolutely. Really good point. And this one did stump me a little. There isn't any guidance at the moment through the government. But my view is that the only reason that the employee isn't working those hours is because they can't. And so my hope would be that how they interpret this is that the average is taken from the hours they would have worked rather than the rather than the hours they did work.
Understood. So in the lead up when the lockdown wasn't on, what was your average working week? So average out the hours. This person says, how does annual leave entitlement work for an employee whilst the shutdown is ongoing? Are full-time employees still accruing the 3.08 hours annual leave per week, even on a government wage subsidy? So they're asking if, in simple terms, if I'm collecting a wage subsidy, am I also accruing my annual leave entitlement during this time?
So I think this is a common misconception. You actually accrue your leave after you've been working there for 12 months. So even though most of us do get on our paychecks that it accrues a little bit at a time, you are entitled to 4 weeks leave after you've been working there for 12 months. So you will be accruing leave during this time. It just might be a question as to how much that leave is worth at the end of all of this, because you're supposed to be paid out by your relevant daily pay or average daily pay.
Right, and that may change significantly due to, obviously, the lockdown period. And we're getting a few questions that are similar to this one, Ashley. As a full-time employee, I'm still yet to be told by my employer if I'm being paid or not, let alone if my wages are now reduced to 80%. Is this acceptable? And if after numerous emails I'm still not getting any definitive answers, what options do I have?
This is absolutely not acceptable. Employment relationships are meant to be founded on a principle of good faith. We're supposed to be talking to each other. Employers are supposed to be open about their situation. So if this isn't happening, then they're not really meeting their obligations. The unfortunate thing is that there's not much we can do to compel them to reply. And my advice for the employee in this situation would be to wait until your first paycheck. And if there are issues, if you haven't been paid properly, then you might need to seek legal advice to see if you can get maybe a bit of a more pushy letter to get them to respond.
Got you. So again, this is about new jobs, people who are sort of in that sort of, holding pattern where they were due to start a new job during the lockdown period. They've signed a contract, were due to start during lockdown, but can't start because of the lockdown. Are you entitled to any pay or the subsidy?
Absolutely, they should be entitled to at least the subsidy. Again, they were a person intending to work. That isn't covered by employment law, and their employer should have applied for the wage subsidy for them.
So in the first instance, what do? Contact the person who was taking you on and say, have you applied for the work subsidy? Have you counted me in your calculations?
Absolutely, and I would definitely recommend that happens, because as much as employees are crying out for information right now, employers are as well. So I think the first thing to touch base is to talk to them and tell them that you are now aware that you're a person intending to work and you're eligible for the subsidy, and ask if they've done it.
All right, this one says, this one's just come in. If I've been called into work to do 1 to 2 hours work, should I be paid for this on top of the wage subsidy, or should I not expect any more?
So I would say at the very least it's meant to be the wage subsidy. The thing to remember about this is the wage subsidy is to help the employer meet its obligations to its employee. So if you're supposed to be getting your minimum hours of work, and if they can't guarantee that, this is what the subsidy is meant to help with. So definitely you can work up to the wage subsidy, but anything more it should be in wages.
This one is a really interesting one, and it looks slightly off. This person says, what happens if you're contacted by your employer and asks you to supply your details, saying they want to apply for the COVID-19 subsidy funds for wages, and then you're made redundant the next day?
Gosh, well, my understanding of the wage subsidy is that you sign a declaration once the employer applies for it, and this declaration says that you won't make people redundant. So already the employer would be breaching its obligations to government. In terms of its obligations to the employee, if this redundancy hasn't been done fairly or reasonably, they may have grounds for a personal grievance.
Right, and also we should say that the Finance Minister, Grant Robertson, had said that signing a declaration and not following through is the equivalent of fraud, pure and simple. This next person says, I'm on a casual contract with one employer. I had regular work over the last 10 months. On March 20th, my employer cut my regular weekly shift with no clear explanation. Should they be applying for the subsidy based on the average hours I have worked until this point?
Absolutely, and the Ministry of Social Development has allowed employers to apply for the wage subsidy for casual workers. So that worker, they should be getting at least the subsidy for their average hours of work.
Okay. Another similar one. My son has been working for 3 weeks for a company on a casual basis, about 10 hours a week. He has been told that as he has not worked for 4 weeks, he is ineligible for the government subsidy. Is that right?
I certainly haven't heard that caveat.
Me neither.
Yeah.
Okay, so question mark that. Maybe they need to ask WINS or someone follow up with that who are administering the subsidy fund. My employer is only paying the $585.50 a week, despite asking us to continue working full-time from home. Are they allowed to do that, this person asks?
Absolutely not. So the Wages Protection Act states that every employee must be paid for every hour they work. Now, if they're working full-time, and obviously that's going to be more than the $585, they should be paid that, their entire wage.
So the company needs to top up their wage in order to meet their full-time hours. Could the employer say, actually, this is all we can afford, the wage subsidy, so we would like to discuss reducing your hours?
Of course, employees and employers can always agree on something else, and that could be something that the employee wants to seriously consider. But if they simply can't afford it, another option could be to agree to work less hours so that it only covers that minimum wage subsidy.
We'll squeeze this quick one in. What about if they apply for the subsidy, get it in a lump sum? Should they pass it on to the worker as a lump sum, or is it okay for them to spread it out to me week by week?
It should be spread out with usual pay.
Thank you so much, Ashley. We've got plenty of unanswered questions. Hopefully we'll be able to have you back. That is Ashley Feckney, who is an employment advocate. That is all we've got time for tonight. We'll be back tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The Ministry of Health has announced new guidelines for funerals, allowing family members within the same bubble of the deceased to visit them in the funeral home. Businesses selling essential goods such as heaters, blankets, whiteware and computers can now do so, but only using phone or online orders. The government has set up an email for people to report any cases of price gouging by essential businesses that are open during the lockdown. And the Prime Minister says plans to bring troops home from Iraq were not accelerated due to COVID-19. Those are the latest headlines. We'll have our next news at 7, then Brian Crump on Nights.
Tonight on Nights, Darren Watson sings the blues down the phone line. We're in splendid isolation with the epidemiologist Michael Baker, because he's stuck at home like the rest of us. How's he coping, and what does he think of the numbers so far? Zoe George looks back at some of her favourite sports stories, given there's no sport on at the moment. And